Welcome to my pathetic channel, Senior JS Dev, where I share my stupid 18 years of bad experience on how to write maintainable code and scalable apps. I created this channel for those who want to become better senior developers like you. In these videos, we're going to exercise our best practices so they become stronger and eventually second nature, just like physical fitness or any other skill. Duh. Our first exercise is going to be practicing an essential technique for building maintainable code, making code more testable and readable through isolation and extraction. Ooh. Specifically, we're going to practice separating our web components business logic from UI templating because we have nothing better to do. So follow along if you want, and let's improve our senior JavaScript development skills together. All right, I'm back, and sorry, I don't know what got into me, but I'm feeling good now. I'm feeling excited about working on this web component with you and fixing it, making it better through extraction. This web component has a lot of cool features to it. It's actually a web component I pulled from this all world time website that I've created in order to help with some various time-related, time zone diffing sort of tasks for users, as well as a simple timer. And the thing that's cool about it is you can set it without using any inputs or number pads or anything like that. So it's very mobile friendly. You just slide these sliders, and then the hours and minutes and seconds change with the slider. So you can see it can all go all the way up to 59 seconds or 59 minutes or 23 hours. You can also choose to count up or count down by checking this box. Obviously, you can start and stop. And when you're counting down, if it's completed, you can choose to have a notification pop up in your browser to say, hey, I'm complete. You can also choose to auto restart the timer. That's kind of handy if you want to do things iteratively. You have a task that needs to start up again. You can just have it start right away. So there's a lot of cool features. Also, one more I'll mention quickly is that this is set up to I won't say rehydrate, but reload its state from local storage. So you'll see if I refresh the browser here, the sliders and time there are set to what it was last time. So you can go away and come back to your timer and it will be set up. All right, so that's all well and good. Now let's take a look at the application code. And as I was going through this again for the second time, I realized that the functionality is great, but it's really not very well written in terms of structure because it's all one file. If you scroll down to the bottom of this web component, you'll see it's over 200 lines of code, 240 lines. So let's see if we can, again, identify the different sections of this web component separated by its business logic and its UI templating. We'll do a quick rundown. We're not going to dive into the weeds in this tutorial. We're just looking at the high-level patterns that we can use for the architecture that we're looking to improve. So here's where my web component starts. Above here, there's some various configuration we're not going to pay too much attention to. My web component starts with props. I'm deconstructing the props. State namespace, this is something that we don't really need to concern ourselves with. It just gives all the components in the tool suite that I talked about their own sort of namespace for the local storage. We don't need to worry about that too much, but we can see we're creating a whole bunch of state for like time, restart time, to go to increase or to count down, restarting, notifying, activating. Most of these are the checkboxes down here, and that's all well and good. We're also storing some state here for the time in milliseconds. We're converting that millisecond time into a display time, which is this hour, minute, second, delineated by colon, as a standard clock might be. Whether it's disabled or not, this is calculated so that when we start the timer, you'll notice I can no longer slide these sliders because the component's disabled. And we have this CB tick, which is using a use callback hook, and it's quite long. So that also might be something we want to look at extracting, but for now, just know that this is basically used so that roughly every half a second, This function gets called to say, well, what's the difference between what was time when I was called last and this time, and do I need to increment my clocks at all? And this handle time change is mostly called when we're using these sliders. It just sets the various states of our time. And then use time tick is where we use that callback tick. Something you can dive into when I leave the link in the description below. But here we see I'm starting to return some JSX. So this is where my template starts, and everything above that, we're going to call that our business logic. And this is what we're interested in extracting. So how do we do that? Well, luckily IDEs come with some pretty handy tools, and we're going to try to leverage those to see what they can give us out of the box. So if I start highlighting just above the template and go up a few lines, you'll see I can click on this light bulb icon, and it's already telling me that I can extract a function in the module scope. And this is what I want to do, but let's see how far I can take it. So I can go up here. Here, if I extract up to here, it's saying, yep, you can go from all the way up here and extract all of this into a function in a module. And that's great. But for some reason, you'll notice, and I'm not sure why, but as I start to go into these use local storage, it doesn't know how to extract that. So that's okay. I'm just going to go as far as I can here. Click on my little light bulb, extract a function in module space, module scope, and I'm going to call this, use the design pattern convention of useProps. Because what I'm going to end up doing here is passing in my props into this function. My props that were passed into my web component get passed in again into useProps, and this is where I can pull apart the props and set up my state and all those things, and then just get passed back an array or an object of variables that my template can then use. So I've done that, and let's go ahead and see where useProps is defined. Here it is down at the bottom, which is fantastic. Now let's go ahead and finish extracting all of these state hooks into the useProp function as well. So just give me a second here and I'll fast forward through this. Okay, so let's just take a second here and look at what work we've done so far. We've moved in these, nope, misspelled that. We've moved these use local storage hooks into our useProp function. And now what we're going to do is pass most of those back, down here at the bottom of our hook, back into the caller, which in our case will be a web component. Here we are up here. And instead of passing these in, I'm going to refactor this and just pass in my props. And I don't need this. And now I'm not destructuring, I should say, very many of my properties that are returned from useProps. Here, you'll see a lot of missing dependencies. That's because they're being provided down here. So let's do a little bit of cleanup, and all I'm doing is making sure all of my variables in the scope of my new useProps function get returned in this object so that my caller can see them. So let's do that now. Okay, and you can see that as soon as I've done that, all of the dependencies in my template are now resolved, and my web component seems to be functioning again. So let's give it a quick sanity test here, just to see if it still does. So when I move some sliders, yep, the hours are moving, the minutes are changing, and my seconds are changing. I can start the timer, which will count down. If I uncheck countdown, my timer starts to count up. And let's just do a very quick check on the notification and restart. So I'll set these all the way down to 0, and maybe give 3 seconds. Check notify, check auto restart. Let's start the timer. Counts down. A pop-up in my browser says an embedded page, says the time is up. So that's just a simple alert. And I click OK, and it restarts to 3 seconds. So it seems to be working fairly well. Nothing seems to be broken there. So that's fantastic. what we've done is we've extracted all of the business logic out of our template. Our template is now about roughly 80 lines shorter, and it's all contained inside of this useProps hook that we wrote. So the timer gets its props, it passes its props into useProps, calculates all of these variables based on the business logic, and then it returns them rendered as a template using JSX. So that's all pretty cool. Now there's one more thing that we need to do in order to make our code more testable, and that is to pull out our useProps into a new file. This is something where some junior developers have a hard time understanding this, and one of the arguments goes that I like to keep all my code in one file because then I don't have to open very many tabs. The solution to that really is get used to opening more tabs or find a new editor that doesn't make it so cumbersome. But really, opening multiple tabs is not a good reason to keep code all bundled up together and not separated according to its concerns. And I'll show you why in a second. But here you can see another light bulb, and if I click on that, it's prompting me to move this to a new file. So I'm going to follow that advice, click on New File. My IDE very graciously saved a new file called useProps, exported that function I had as a property on the module. And if I go back into my template now, I can see it's also already imported the useProps hook for me. So that dependency is satisfied. And now this component is looking a whole bunch cleaner already. So that's great. Now let's take a look at useProps here. And one of the main reasons we have extracted this into a new file is so that we can write tests for it. Now we can treat this as more or less as a pure function and write any tests we see fit for it. So I'm going to write a little bit of boilerplate code here at first. So let's create a new file called useprops.test.js. This is where all of our test code is going to go. And I'm going to steal a little bit of boilerplate here. And we'll take a quick look here. So this test suite is set up to, I've commented out the dependencies that it has. So it's using useCallback and useState from React. Those are things that I'm going to want to mock here. You can see on line 13 and 14, I've created some sample mocks so that when I start calling my imported useProps, which I'll do here, and I'll call that target from useProps. So import useProps as target. And in my tests, I'll start referencing target. But the cool thing is once I start doing that, so I can say target, and I'll pass in the props that I want to test, I get to mock any of the React hooks like useState or useCallback in order to simulate the React functionality. But it can save me some time in calling this multiple times, or I just get to decide what useState will do. Like for example, no matter what gets passed into useState here, my mock can override that and say, oh, useState always returns cat or 42 or whatever I want useState to return, thanks to my mock here. And this is how I can test my business logic of my web component without using any libraries like testing library or having to render this entire component to the DOM and worry about a lot of cross concerns between multiple properties and clicking on things and rendering things into the DOM. It's a much cleaner abstraction. Let's take another quick look through our useProps hook that we've extracted and see if there's any other places that we'd like to refactor. I remember there was a long function, here it is, that might be a good candidate for refactoring because it's going to complicate my testing quite a lot if I have to worry about all of the different code paths of this function as I'm trying to test more simple logic, such as the Boolean is disabled and display time strings, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of keeping this in here and keeping this function longer, I'm going to extract it, and I see a light bulb here. And luckily, I have the option here to easily extract a function to the module scope again. So this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to call this function useCBTick. Use to follow the hook naming convention for React. And then down here at the bottom, I can move this to a new file. Awesome, just like that. Now you'll notice an interesting thing here that I love is that for some reason my IDE has found a bug that it didn't find when all my code was smushed together into one big file. And that is, it's telling me that setTimeMS is a dependency on this useCallback hook. And I missed that before. So I'm going to pass that in, setTimeMS, which I already have a reference to. I know that because I must be using it inside of my callback here and here. All right, I've just fixed that little bug. Great. I'm really happy with that. And just as before, I can create my test suite, use cbtick.test.js, and I will also provide some boilerplate here. Even if I don't write a single test, at least the test suite is all ready to go, and if I find a bug, I can write a test for it to make sure I never regress back to that bug again. So I just need to modify this a little bit. Like that. And we'll call that good for now. We'll just make sure that we are properly importing this new hook that we've created called useCBTick. And that's it. So just in a quick review, we've been able to extract a couple layers of business logic out from our monolithic web component. And by doing so, it's allowed us to create more readable code by creating smaller functions, as well as isolating concerns so that we can write unit tests around different scenarios that allow us to have higher confidence that our code is working as it's expected to. And that's it for this exercise. I hope you found this useful and hope to see you back soon as we learn more principles and techniques about becoming a senior JavaScript developer. Until then, take care.